Man, good pop.
Indeed.
What's going on, Oxbox fam? Welcome to the Champagne Room. Um, you know what time it is. We have the lovely Miss Willow here. Say hello.
Hello.
We're gonna sit down and get educated today, like we like to do. We're gonna learn a little bit about the industry, learn a little bit about Willow, and you know, just sit back and chop it up for a while. We'll sip some champagne.
Sweet.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Okay. Well, let's get started. So, first, let me say thank you for coming. I
Yeah.
appreciate you taking the time, spending it with me, spending it with the viewers, and, just talking a little bit.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
Of course. How you doing today?
Pretty good.
Yeah?
I mean, hang in there.
Anything excited happened today?
Well, this is pretty exciting, honestly. It's pretty cool. It's like getting back into my media side of things, which is a really good kickoff.
Okay.
And it all ties together for me. So, yeah,
okay.
I'm excited to chop it up.
Cool. So, let's just get into it.
Sweet.
So, Willow, where are you from? Where did you grow up?
I am from the Portland area, Oregon, originally.
Okay.
Yeah, I spent about the last, 20 years up until mid-pandemic in California.
Okay.
And so, I was there for a long time, but it was nice to come back home, and I missed it here. So
yeah. So, how was it like growing up in Portland? How was it?
Well, I guess it depends on the context a little bit. I mean, I love it here. I'm definitely a nature girl at heart, and a lot of what got me into dancing and just like being sensual, and I've always been a dancer and stuff, but a lot of that came from my connection with nature and everything. And so that's also what sort of inspired me to explore things, which might sound a little disjointed, but I'm sure we'll come around to that.
It'll all come together. I'm sure it'll all mesh together.
Yeah, let's just say Oregon has a lot of great spots to like go deep in the woods and run around naked and not run into anybody and just be able to experience that freedom.
Is that something that you do?
Oh, yeah.
Naked in the woods?
Yeah. At least, I mean, to be honest, I haven't had much time for such like frivolities lately. But growing up, it wasn't just a frivolity; it was like essential,
Right.
So,
wow.
What can I say?
a naked run. Okay. So.
Shocking! I'm from Portland, right?
Right. Yeah. So, like, what about like family life growing up? How was your family life? You got like siblings, both parents?
Yeah. So, so I have an older brother and sister who are 6 and 4 years older than me. So I was kind of the baby in my immediate family. Okay. And then my parents split when I was about 11 and moved from like Happy Valley, boring area, which is a funny thing. The borderline of that went through our property. That probably explains a lot about me. Boring and Happy Valley. But anyway, we moved a little closer to Portland, and I got to see my parents like happy in new relationships for the first time. And that was kind of a big deal and another sort of influencing factor as far as like my roots and stuff. But yeah, and then I have a lot of like step siblings that I didn't grow up with that came on the scene later. But essentially now I have a huge family.
How was that? You got along with them instantly? It was all good?
Yeah, I mean, kind of funny stories about how both sides like came together with each of my parents' new partners and step siblings and stuff. But yeah, for the most part, I mean, some of us have had our ups and downs, but we get along. I mean, we definitely have a really strong like bond of love underneath it. And like every generation seems to be healing and growing a little bit more, which is really awesome. But we've also had a lot of trauma and things like in like my family history on both sides. And so some of that kind of stuff is like what got me interested in looking into this taboo thing in
like
society.
What type of trauma do you mean?
Well, there's been like sex abuse of like varying degrees on both sides, but also just like drug and alcohol abuse, like substance abuse. Also some like mental illness and stuff. So there's a lot of stuff that isn't always easy to talk about, but it's another thing that's like very taboo that is one of the things that, excuse me, just like stripping in general, I feel like there's a lot more to it. And it's interesting to see how all these things kind of like cycle together. So
has that been like an issue in your life, like for you personally, like drug abuse, alcohol abuse, anything like that?
Not substance abuse
No,
so
not
much. Yeah, I've been through like some, sexual assault. Not in my family necessarily, but also growing up with sort of that in the background, and because I was the youngest, like a lot of things weren't really like told to me about what was going on in family history and stuff like that. So a lot of it didn't come to light until I was older, but it helped me kind of understand certain things about myself.
Okay.
And then just also like being a survivor of, sexual assault. Sorry to get like heavy into it, right? But
So one thing,
we're talking about taboo stuff, right? So
one thing I need you to know. So here, amongst all the viewers here, in the champagne room, in the Ox Box in general, it's an open area. We talk about anything. Sweet. Nothing's off limits. You can say anything.
You did ask me if there's anything off limits, and I did say no. So
well, there's definitely nothing off limits here. Anything you want to talk about, feel free. So it's all good.
Sweet.
But,
I just don't mind being real about it, because I figure that's why we're all here, right? So like talk about the reality behind the curtain or whatever.
We would definitely prefer the real.
So that's like, I don't need to get into detail or anything, but that's part of like, the background painting that's, my life has sort of been illustrated on, and so like this path in particular. So
What about like school? How you're a pretty good student, or what were you into in school? Drama.
Yeah, I've always been into the arts. So I did a lot of art and a lot of music. I've been an actual dancer my whole life. In fact, my family nickname is Boogie, which I earned at a very early age. Yeah, because I kind of like lived in my leotard and like just nobody could get me out of it. I was dancing around all day. So my sister nicknamed me that, and it stuck. So now like my nieces and nephews call me Auntie Boogie.
Auntie Boogie, yeah.
But yeah, so
like, what type of dancing were you, like? So you in leotards? What that's?
I think when I was really little, I was all about like tumbling and acrobatics, and then I liked ballet and stuff like that too. But I just any kind of dance, and from like an early age, I was always really attracted to like world beats and stuff like that, and learning kind of more obscure dances. So I didn't like get too many opportunities to like study really intensely, but I just learned from a lot of situations, took classes here and there, and like practice a lot of things. So I just have always really loved to dance, and that runs in my family as well. Actually, my parents were dancers when they were young.
Okay.
And they were part of a dance school that they went to, but then the dance school had a performance troupe that was like more of a professional troupe, and so they were dance partners in that.
Really?
So they did all the crazy exactly.
Really? Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, they did all the crazy lifts and like all the old school dances and stuff. Yeah,
so were like your parents are from this area as well? Or?
Yeah, both sides of my family.
Really?
For several generations. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you were into that in school, but like, would you consider yourself a good student? Like you made the honor roll and stuff like that?
Yeah, especially when I was younger. And then, so studies like always came really easy to me until around like junior high school. It started to get a little harder, and I hadn't like really developed the habit of having to try that hard. And then also I think I was dealing with ADHD, but that's another thing that didn't really like come to light till later in life. Which honestly I think is like little side note, like something really common with a lot of dancers and sex workers actually is like neurodivergence. But like
ADHD. That's
and
like OCD.
Maybe some of that too. Like ADHD seems to be really common, but I think part of it is just because like a lot of the perks of the job are things that are compatible when you have a hard time like fitting into the normal social boxes in different ways, but especially when it comes to like how your brain is wired, how your sleep patterns are wired, like how your attention span is wired, just even the need for like physical movement to be able to process and like think or deal with emotions. I mean, there's a lot of aspects to it, but even the flexible schedule, because sometimes those kinds of things, like I've also noticed like a lot of dancers and sex workers in general too, there's like a lot of chronic conditions which I think are sometimes wrapped up with some of the other aspects of people's backgrounds that are common, and one of the common things that brings us to this work. But generally, like there's a lot of things that work well. Like, if you're somebody who has like a chronic condition that like sometimes you feel great and then other times you're too exhausted, like you can not work, but you can't like hold down a regular job if you can't be consistent. But so there's a lot a lot of different aspects, I think, that a lot of people don't think about when they think about somebody choosing to do this kind of work, or why would they do it, you know?
Yeah, so that, I mean, that's a good point of view that, like you said, a lot of people don't think about that. Like, why would you decide to have this job?
Yeah.
I mean, the flexible schedule is probably a big perk.
Mm-hmm.
That's
yeah.
So, okay, so since we're getting into it, let's just talk about it. How did you get into dancing? What made you dance, and how old were you when you decided to start dancing? So you would be considered a vet. Right?
I suppose so.
Okay. So yeah. Okay. So when you got into it, it was like kind of a different like different industry, right? It's changed a lot.
Yeah, and there's a lot of that I can't necessarily speak to because my involvement, especially this time around, like it's only been a year and it's been kind of limited so far. But even within that, there's like a lot of things I've noticed. But so I started dancing when I was 18, pretty much fresh out of high school.
Fresh out of high school. That's crazy. You know, actually, I was in Oklahoma. I seen it in Oklahoma, and actually I just seen it in Seattle too. It's there's the what do you call them? Billboards, and it's the ones outside the club, and it's like now hiring class of, you know, so now.
Oh dear.
so now.
I thought the military recruitment was hardcore. Wow.
No, so now it's 2023. Like, so I was in. This was back in like probably 2018.
Wow.
I think it was Oklahoma or Texas or Dallas, and I was like, it was a billboard that said now hiring class of 2018.
Wow.
I was like, oh,
that's
so y'all ready?
That's something I haven't seen before.
Grabbing straight out of high school.
So that's one part of the country I've not worked in. So.
Okay. So
it can be a very different culture everywhere, from what I hear from like different friends.
Well, yeah, we're definitely gonna get into traveling and whatnot.
Yeah,
so,
sweet. So
what got you into it at 18?
Yeah, so I was just really intrigued by the whole idea of it. I didn't know a lot about it. What I did know was that it's this taboo thing, but I was very interested in taboo subjects, I guess, and like what like when people just kind of like judge something and label it and turn away, there's more going on there. And so I'd been through some pretty intense life experiences that told me that there's a lot more going on under the scenes, and you don't always really know or understand. So I was intrigued. I've always just been a really curious person. So that's gotten me into lots of trouble.
Really? We'll get into some of that too.
Yeah. But it's also, I don't know, gotten me to do some pretty cool stuff too, like risky stuff that turned out well, or just, I guess, have the courage to explore and stuff like that. Because my curiosity tends to like outweigh my courage a lot of the times. But so I had kind of that going on. I had the intrigue. I also just like, I was looking at graduating high school. I was still kind of like going through my own emotional journey from stuff that had kind of gone on in my family the last couple of years of high school, and trying to process things. I had been in Brazil for a year as an exchange student, and I came back my senior year, and my world kind of like crashed in at the same time I was trying to reintegrate, into high school, back into the culture after this crazy year abroad, and think about graduating. And so college and stuff was just like such a distant thing for me to deal with at the time, and I wasn't even sure what I wanted to do. But I wanted to do something that kind of, while I was trying to figure it out, something that would help me just explore like deeper aspects of who I was, but also what I love to do in life, which is to dance. So,
yeah. So you love to dance, and it was already kind of like, so it was your curiosity.
Yeah.
It wasn't like.
And I was exploring sexuality and stuff too. Okay, so that's another aspect of
exploring sexuality. So at that age, would you consider yourself promiscuous at that age, or?
Yeah, I think I was kind of going through a phase like that, and which honestly, I think my definition of what promiscuous is probably different than the mainstream. So there's that. But I wasn't necessarily being true to myself, and I was just kind of like going along with an experience by default a little bit, instead of sort of being able to really figure out what I wanted and what I felt was right. So in some ways it was like, it's just part of my exploring, but I was definitely going off the rails a little bit, just trying to deal with life and not realizing that I was neurodivergent at that point, and also trying to integrate a lot of stuff. But yeah, I really liked the aspect of being able to kind of have permission to explore something that I felt and was like really affected by, as far as like being a person who's very sexual and very like erotic by nature and love to dance and love to be sensual, but like a place where there's permission for that and permission to explore it. But I was also working really hard on my self-esteem, because that was also part of my like promiscuity, is that just I needed lots of attention, and I would just sort of like cave if it felt like really good to be getting this attention or whatever it was, you know, instead of being able to kind of stick to my guns and be clear about what I wanted and have like strong willpower. And I realized a lot of that was related to my self-esteem. So ironically, this kind of work is like, it's a situation where it can really tear you down if you let it. But for me, it was really helpful because I got to see so many different types of women and bodies and like people's reaction to me. Like when I looked in the mirror, I just saw everything I thought was wrong with my body, and I wasn't comfortable with it. But other people seemed to think I was hot. So for a while, I was just like, okay, let this be my mirror for a while. I'm just going to like try to fake it till I make it. And then I actually got in a little bit of better shape by dancing also, like, you know, being able to do my acrobatic stuff and like, you know, and so all around, I think because I put my mind to it being something that helped my self-esteem instead of like tearing it down, it turned out to be a really good thing for that reason. And that was put to the test a lot of times as well, but therein some of my stories.
Right. So do you remember your first day?
You know, it's funny because I don't clearly remember my very first day, but I remember like how like answering the ad in the newspaper, because
so it was an ad,
mind you, this was back in
what club?
So it wasn't a club either. So this is the funny thing.
Okay, yeah.
So it was back in 1996, back when dinosaurs roamed the earth and they walked around in little bikinis. No.
Dinosaurs.
Yeah, so
like that's the 90s. You had to be there. I know some of your youngsters wasn't around.
Yeah, so this is one of the things that changed. We didn't have the internet, so well, I mean, we did, but not like this. Anyway, that was about to be born overnight.
Some of these viewers don't even know what a newspaper is.
Yeah. Okay. So
you know,
it's okay. Look in the newspaper. You can find out in the newspaper. So I had moved temporarily to Boise, Idaho, which is a whole other offshoot of stories there. But one of my good friends from my year in Brazil lived in Idaho, became like my brother. He and his best friend, who had gone somewhere else while we were in our exchange year, we all decided we were going to like go backpacking through Europe. So we all moved in together to save money and go venture off. But of course, we had just graduated high school, so what we succeeded in was partying a lot. Right. And anyway, so during my little stint in Boise for about 4 months, I moved there. I needed work and was looking in the want ads, as you do, classifieds, for a job. Right. My little pencil, circling them, and then picking up my wall telephone to call them. So I saw an ad for dancers wanted, and I was like, ooh, dancers, like cabaret, whatever. And then it's like, must be 18 or over. And I was like, oh, it's probably naked. And then I was like, actually, that sounds kind of neat. Yeah, right. And so at first I was like, okay, it's probably sketchy, whatever. But I said,
what was the name? What was the name of the place?
It wasn't even a place. So it was actually for like bachelor parties and private shows.
Oh, gotcha.
So it was this like, I guess, producer, or I don't know, manager more like, really, not a pimp. It wasn't that kind of situation, but basically a manager. It's like an entertainment company, basically just a small company. And so he had a few dancers, he had like bouncers, a couple other types of entertainers. And so I answered the ad, I went to the location, and me and this other girl showed up at the same time and became instant besties. But anyway, because we had like connected so well, I think both felt safe to like go forward. But interestingly, like it seems to a lot of people more hardcore that I started out like doing private shows and bachelor parties, because I think people's minds explode even more about what that really means or whatever. It's like closer to escorting. It's it could be more dangerous and all that.
Another stigma.
Yeah, totally. And it can be more dangerous if if you're not doing it.
Did the service have some security with you guys?
Mm-hmm. So it was all very secure, and like I was like very strict boundaries and stuff like that. But
so let's stay right there for a second.
Yeah.
So you said it's very strict boundaries. Were those boundaries ever crossed, maybe with you, or have you ever were they attempted to be crossed? Or?
I mean, yeah, that definitely happened. But, you know, to my own surprise, I was prepared for that. And I kind of went through a little bit of training to be prepared for that also. Yeah. But to my surprise, it didn't happen very often. Okay. And I think partly because people were vetted so well and we were so clear about the boundaries in the beginning. Mm-hmm. But yeah, at the parties and stuff, people were usually really respectful. And sometimes they get drunk a little bit out of hand. But as soon as we were like, hey, you know, they usually back off. And I never had any massive issues. Well, so in this particular instance, like this was like a no sex situation, and it was no touching unless we, the dancers, sort of like okayed it. Right. So we would be doing our show, and so in a bachelor party, for example, the guys would be like, there was different kinds of scenes, but one, for example, is common is like we'd be at some party location, and they kind of like sit in a circle, and we'd be in the middle. There'd usually be like 2 or 3 of us, and so we'd just kind of like put on our show dancing, and then they'd have money for tips. And so we'd go around taking the tips like all sexy. And sometimes, you know, we'd climb on them a little bit, do like a little lap dance or whatever. Nothing too crazy. So we could have maybe had the option to take it farther if we wanted to. But the deal with this situation was like, we're in charge. So wherever we say the boundary is, but also they didn't want to get in trouble legally either. And this is like Boise, Idaho, where they're very strict about stuff. So that just never really came up as an issue. And that was part of what helped me feel safe about it. And also I liked the fact that like it wasn't a public place where anybody could come in and see me, you know? So like I kind of got to choose the audience, and
you didn't have to worry about somebody just you knew popping up.
Yeah. And we'd always like take the money up front, and like the private shows, it was pretty much the same. There was like no contact unless the dancer elicited it.
Where were these shows at? Would they be like the hotel rooms? Would they be at homes, or would they be like at private venues?
Kind of all the above. Yeah. Okay. The bachelor parties were usually more like a private venue, or somebody's home sometimes. But the private shows were usually, somebody's home or a hotel room. Right. Yeah. So, yeah.
Okay. So how long did that last?
So that was like 3 or 4 months. So, I mean, it's funny because like now 3 or 4 months feels like just a blink of an eye, but it feels like it was a big chunk of time, but probably because it was so new and I learned so much, you know, in that little bit of time. But then I ended up moving back to Portland. And I wasn't sure about dancing there and dancing on stage and stuff. So I ended up getting a job at the Olive Garden. And I was like, just sort of an interim, like, you know, start working right when I get back. And then funny enough, so I was hosting there and really fed up with the managers who were like, it's weird. Okay, this might sound strange, but it's like the way they treated the whole hierarchy with like who's a hostess, who gets to serve, all these kind of stuff. It was very much like what certain clubs and certain people's views of like how dancers are sort of treated. So it was like, oh, if you're kind of like a blonde Barbie doll, you can be a server, no experience needed, you know? But like, you know, so I was not that or whatever. So I was like stuck hosting, which was fine. But one of my friends there that I made friends with really quickly, she was a blonde Barbie doll, but then she got pregnant. And so she and I one day were sitting around like bitching about just how much we couldn't stand the management. And I was like, you know, I used to dance and people would ask me like, don't you feel so exploited, you know, as a stripper, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, no, I don't have to put up with this stuff. I can choose my audience, you know, but people come in and they're not treating you respectfully. Like you still have to serve them or you're going to lose your job, you know?
So y'all hear this out. So are you saying that the servers and hostess at Olive Garden are exploited more?
At least back then. I can't speak to it now. It's been a long time. Okay. So yeah, I better be careful. No, but I mean in general. But but in general, any of y'all out there in like the restaurant industry, in retail, any kind of hierarchical job, maybe even at the office, like there's so many things where you're treated like the way people would be like, oh, you're just a whore or something like that. It's like, well, if you're having to sell your integrity to do your job, it's the same damn thing. And for me, it's like, you know, your body's your body, and what you want to do with it is one thing. And if there's like a respectful exchange, then there's nothing wrong with that. It's about each their own. You know what I mean? But it has to do with like the respect, the integrity, and like the exchange, and like, you know, so I mean, I've just talked to so many people who feel exploited like that. And certainly it happens in this industry a lot, don't get me wrong. And there's so many different kinds of work within the industry, so many different situations, like it definitely happens. but I'm just saying that there's a way to do it, and there's a whole thread of it that exists where that's not the case. And a lot of dancers who are good at their job and good at the hustle, especially in big places like gentlemen's clubs and stuff, they'll be like, no, it's the guys that are being exploited. Right. I mean, meanwhile, like the dancers are sometimes being exploited by the management, or like, it's just, but it's not always the case that it's just awful or whatever.
Okay, so picking up there, Olive Garden.
Yeah.
Olive Garden kind of pushed you into the club.
Yeah. Well, so it turned out that this particular friend of mine, she's like, well, so she was pregnant also at the time, but she had just turned 21. She's like, well, I just turned 21, as you know. My family owns Mary's Club downtown, which was the first strip club in Portland. It's a historic place, family-owned business, just a little mom and pop friendly neighborhood strip club. And she's like, now that I'm 21, I can go work there. So I just put in my 2 weeks notice. She's like, you used to dance? She's like, why don't you blow this popsicle stand with me? Let's get out of here. Like, come with me and dance. So I was like, okay. So I put in my 2 weeks notice that same day, and then went over to Mary's Club. And that's where a lot of my history lies as far as like the stage dancing.
When she was pregnant?
Mm-hmm.
When she started dancing?
No, she wasn't dancing. She was bartending there.
Okay.
But her mom owned and ran it at the time. And it was her grandfather that had originally started it in the 40s as a piano bar. So I can get into the history of Mary's a little bit at some point if you want to put a pin in that. But
definitely.
I mean, interesting.
I've been to Mary's a couple times.
Yeah.
I went to the older Mary's probably only twice. The newer Mary's I've been to a few times. I like the newer location.
Yeah, me too. Mary's is like a big part of my personal history, which is like a little bit of not necessarily a typical path. Like I don't know if there's a typical path, but because it's kind of an anomaly in the strip club world, but it definitely influenced me a lot.
My man Easy said you were spitting facts about the exploitation and whatnot.
Aw,
Big dog, what's up? What's up, FIFA boy?
Sweet.
Easy, Sebastian, I see you. Appreciate y'all pulling up. Appreciate y'all.
Yeah.
So do you remember your first shift at Mary's, and like how did you see any difference from doing the parties in Boise and the club in Mary's? Was there an instant difference on that first day?
Yeah, well, it did take me a little bit to get used to the stage, but I loved it. I mean, I had been on stages before most of my life, like dancing or acting in school, stuff like that.
What was the first song you ever danced to on stage? The first song you ever danced on stage?
Oh my God. I can't believe I don't remember, but I'm pretty sure it was a Doors song.
Doors? Okay.
Pretty sure.
Okay.
Maybe not, because so at the old Mary's, like we dealt with an actual jukebox. And so after a little bit, like I got my own CD in the jukebox, but I had to like use, wow, memories.
Okay.
Y'all out there know what a jukebox is?
That's great.
But I'm pretty sure, it was probably some classic rock song.
Okay.
That was definitely my jam all the time.
So you said it took you a while to get used to the stage.
Yeah, so it was just kind of a different scene. In some ways, it wasn't totally different than the bachelor parties where there's just kind of like, like a horseshoe or a circle of guys around. But the stage was higher and stuff. And also just like getting used to like the pole. I'd never used one of those before. So it was kind of fun to experiment with a little bit.
Did you have pretty good pole tricks that you didn't think you had?
Yeah, I mean, it took me a little bit, but not super long because I was already pretty acrobatic and I already jammed on the monkey bars at school, stuff like that. Right. But I mean, it had been a while, but some of those things, it's just like, it's like riding a bike, except your muscles have to catch up. Right. But yeah, I mean, and there's some really, really good women too, just that like, it really amazed me because I had this idea in my head before all that of, what strippers looked like and stuff, which is why at first I didn't think I fit that qualification because I'm like 5'4", very slight, small breasted, like dark hair, and I thought at the time that it was just like all about the Barbie doll blonde, which is its own lovely thing. Don't get me wrong, but it's like
the fake tits, big blonde hair.
Yeah, it's sort of like supermodel, like larger than life though, like and so
5'11" type.
Yeah, and so that's beautiful as well. But like, there's so many other kinds of beauty as well, and so I really liked, and I kind of learned later as well that like, so Mary's is kind of an anomaly. Portland is also kind of an anomaly as far as like strip clubs and like what kind of dancers and like the bigger variety that there's actually a market for and stuff like that. But I feel really fortunate because that helped me just like open my mind and, like help my self-esteem so much. And then it helped me just really appreciate a lot of other kinds of beauty as well. So it also helped me with things like, this might sound strange, but it went pretty deep. It was like even things around like jealousy and relationships and stuff. Like I'd never really been a jealous person like that. A lot of guy friends, and it was never a big deal. But there's some things that run kind of deep, and it's like until you're confronted with it, you don't realize this is like actually just a cultural thing, not necessarily that's something that's ingrained or necessarily even useful or like,
Well, since you went there, let's definitely get back to this. Just have a quick question.
Yeah.
Is monogamy realistic?
Well, that's a pretty loaded question, and maybe like a whole other episode.
Trust me, they want to know.
They want to know. Okay, well, yeah.
So
that is interesting because I see how it relates to this topic a lot, but it's interesting you asked me too because I've been going through a journey with like around that. But so
when you're at the club, right, and like a lot of the customers are married men, right?
Yeah.
I guess it's not considered cheating. Unless it is in your relationship, I don't know what it is in your relationship or not.
Right.
When you see married men and a lot of them, they want other favors and stuff. Was that eye opening? Like at a young age, was that a shock value to that when you first started?
I think so, but maybe not so much because I'd already been exposed to some pretty shocking like stuff, So, not even necessarily exposed in person, but just like to the topic, like these things exist or whatever, and this is a reality. So, and also since from a young age, I had like men, whistling at me. This is stuff like there's certain ways we've come a long way in the last 20 years or so. You still, there's still a lot of the like toxic masculinity stuff that happens, like just walking down the road, getting whistled at. I'm sure any of the ladies watching can relate, but it was like worse back then just because now there's more awareness and stuff. But so I was getting that kind of attention, from like junior high age anyway. So it wasn't super shocking, but it was like definitely took me a little bit deeper as far as just like my ideas about men and like different circumstances, different situations. And one interesting thing, like you were asking me about like what's different now. So I know probably circle back to that as well. But one of those things is like, for me personally, it's not necessarily different about the industry, but at that young age, I was very open-minded. And part of the reason I was exploring this whole thing was because I wanted to expand my mind and my understanding even further. And really understand this like topic and this whole like situation with sex and sexuality and like the repression of it, and the sex industry and all that stuff. But I also, sorry, I just lost my train of thought. Maybe I'm like, this is so stimulating. My brain's exploding in 5 different directions. Anyway, I wanted to understand all of that. But I also like didn't realize how closed I was in certain ways, because part of it was like wanting to heal, but I hadn't really like even gone into all of my pain yet. And so this is the kind of work that can take you like pretty deep up into it pretty quick. So like you just have one interaction sometimes is all it takes to just like slam you into something or trigger something, And so in exploring all that, it's like I also went into it with very, very clear, strict boundaries of my own, which was very good, especially at that young age. Like I was determined, like, I'm like, I'm not going to have sex for money. I'm not going to let people disrespect me. And, those got put to the test in a lot of ways. But certain aspects of that, like it also came to like, I don't want to do this job just for money. And so there's certain things or certain approaches, like say just the aspect or the idea of hustling, for example. It's like you're doing that to get the money. Right. That's how I saw it anyway. And so I kind of limited myself and didn't realize how much I was sort of like judging my own customers and stuff, Right. And so things like, married men, like relationships, what people do or whatever. I just had my idea that like, okay, these are just men that are kind of jerks and like whatever. But later, some of the things in my approach now have changed from what I've learned. It's like I just have such a deeper understanding of life, like coming back to this so many years later. And also coming back to it as a priestess, which is, kind of another topic, but that's a capacity where I've acted as a minister a lot. So people come to me like for counseling and stuff like that. So I've just gotten to understand a lot more about like what causes behaviors or what it is that people are looking for. And so I feel like I have a deeper understanding of what clients are coming in and looking for. And it's very different. So just trying to answer about like a married man, for example, it's such a broad spectrum because sometimes there's people like exploring, okay, they're like, there's problems in my relationship. I don't know if it's just me. Like one time, for example, when I was still doing private shows, I had a client who just wanted me to dance for a little bit. And he was a little bit distant and a little weird. And I was like, okay, it's fine, whatever. So I danced for like 10 minutes and he's like, okay, that's enough. And I was like, oh my God, what did I do? And he's like, no. I did this because I have not been able to get aroused with my partner for like a year. And I don't know if it's psychological or if it's physical. And I haven't been able to figure it out. And so I just thought, let's see what happens. And he's like, I got aroused right away. And so I learned what I needed to learn. And thank you. And so it was just like, wow. I mean, that really blew my mind,
So he just paid to see if you could get him.
Yeah. And then that gave him the information he needed so he could go deal with his relationship. So he got clear about like, he knew like, okay, now I know what the next step is, so there's things like that. And then there's sometimes that people really are just being jerks and they just want to go have their kicks and they are cheating because that's not part of their relationship or something they're open about, but there's all kinds of things in between. So it does get really interesting kind of trying to find out, like to target what is it that each person is looking for and what do they need and what can I offer them that is within my boundaries and to whatever degree helpful for whatever it is they need. But for me too, it's like whenever I have an opportunity to learn a little bit more about what it is they're looking for, it's always interesting to me to see how I can be helpful without like enabling if there's like an actual problem,
Gotcha.
But it's a trip, man. That's very fascinating.
That's a lot. You just put a lot out there. That's a lot to think about. That's a lot of different point of views.
Tried to warn you.
No. I'm happy, but just in just that story, that's that's a lot to think about. Like spending like I couldn't imagine having to spend money, to see if I can still get hard from somebody else or get an erection or arouse them. Proper terminology. I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. Yeah, he got a raging boner, and he's like, "Good, I'm good, thanks."
Okay, thanks for that. But okay, so kind of going back to you just get into the club.
Yeah.
You're starting to get comfortable. What was there anything else that was shocking that you didn't like that you just kind of stuck through, when did you decide that okay, I can do this?
So some of those things were a little bit gradual. Like for example, every dancer I think kind of has their boundaries about like, let's just be real. How much pussy am I going to show? Some people have more boundaries about that. Like how close am I going to get? How comfortable am I with touching and stuff? So for me, some of those questions were a little bit easier to navigate because back then the laws were a little bit stricter. At least where I was working, there was like absolutely no touching. We didn't even do table dances or anything yet. It was mostly stage, or it was all stage pretty much. And so I didn't have to worry about like the touch factor and all that.
Okay.
But I do remember feeling like I wanted my show to be more like theatrical and stuff and not so like pornographic. Right. And that's some of the stuff I've sort of relaxed about over time and just felt more like, well, it's all in art and what you do with it. And I just feel more comfortable.
So you're saying it was only stage, there was no dances?
Yeah, that's one thing that was very different. Okay. Yeah, so it was pretty much all stage and we like changed outfits pretty much every time. And there was a lot more thematic stuff. So it was more performance oriented. Gotcha. But, people still like got close and like, picked up tips, like put it in the G-string or like, and boobs or whatever. Like, but yeah, there wasn't table dances or anything like that. And then I think after I'd been there for a couple of years, shortly before I moved away to California, we started doing table dances, but it was just like right at the table. You were still technically not allowed to touch, but you could just like get as close as you possibly could without actually touching. And
what about like your family? at this point, did like your family know you were dancing or no?
Yeah. Well, so when
did they support? Or?
Well, so they were pretty freaked out, but they were supportive nonetheless. This was part of my own like test for myself. I guess because
you told them.
I told them. Okay. No, I told them like, so when it was a little easier because I was in Idaho. Not
so you told them when you were in Idaho.
The beginning. Yeah, when I was like, okay, how do I feel about this? Because I thought, I liked it, but I was like trying to also go forward with whatever I could understand integrity to be at that point in my life. So I was like, all right, this isn't going to be comfortable, but if I can like hold my head up and tell my family what I'm doing, then it's safe for me to continue and trust myself that I can maintain my integrity, or if I can stand up this much to begin with, and if I can't do that, then I probably have it's probably not a good idea for me to do this.
Right.
So yeah, I just came out and told them, but they had a few months to absorb that before I came back to town.
So a Big Dog says it was like about the last part. He was saying like it's crazy to spend money and not be able to touch. Is that?
I mean, yeah, people. I mean, that's the thing. I think a lot of that depends on where you are too, because I mean, times have changed for one thing, but like if you're in a place where like there's no women and there's no nothing, like just to see a naked woman and have her close enough that you can like smell her and like whatever, that's probably something.
Get a whiff of the hair when it goes by.
Those little things go a long way. But yeah, it's all relative to a point. But I think generally speaking, like I think that's a pretty general like accepted thing that because touch is really important too, even if it's not necessarily sexual, just like the sensualness of like being up close and feeling somebody's skin against yours, and
right. So,
it really adds to it. So
my bad, but you were saying how your family when you told them.
Oh yeah, well, so I mean, they were kind of like shocked, but sort of not surprised. But also I think mostly just worried for me because their thoughts are like, oh my God, it's the gateway. They're gonna, in 3 months she's gonna be a prostitute. She's gonna, there's gonna be a pimp running her life. She's gonna be hooked on drugs. So I think they had a little more faith in me than that, but also they were just worried for me, which I mean, really they had every right to be, because that's the thing is like it is a slippery slope, and it depends on like where and how you get involved and what the whole scene is like, which varies. Like it could easily have been that, but I tried to have a good thorough conversation with them and my parents especially, and let them know like here's what I'm doing to keep myself safe and like healthy mentally.
Did they tell you to stop?
No, and by then they already knew that I wouldn't listen to them anyway. So they kind of like, okay, be supportive or not, like you're gonna do what you want, so I might as well try to be supportive.
So when you came back, were you living with
I lived with my mom at that point for a little bit. And so that is a little fuzzy as far as like how much time passed, but I think it was only like a couple months before I was like dancing at the club after like working at the restaurant.
And was she kind of like, you're coming home at 3 a.m, 2 a.m?
No, she knew. And I don't even know if I started with night shift. I can't really remember that part too clearly, but I mean, she knew it was a late job and stuff. Yeah. I think that my parents mostly were just glad to know that where I was and when I was coming home and stuff, and before that, like I've always like kept in good touch, and we have a pretty good relationship. There's been ups and downs, but I've always tried to just be respectful to my parents, and they've really stretched themselves to be supportive, because I was definitely like the wild card in the family.
And so you said that you went down to California. Where in California?
So I started in the Bay Area, and at that time I had a 3-year-old, and I was really trying to get myself going as an artist. So I had a booth down at the Portland Saturday Market for a few years, from the time I was pregnant until my kid was about 3. And so I danced a little bit to try to like fund the move down there. And then I moved in with some friends, and we started this art company. And then my friend there had been somebody who lived in Portland and danced there. So we ended up both dancing in San Francisco to help kind of like fund our mutual business as well.
What was the club? What was the first club you danced in San Francisco?
So that was the Gold Club, and and that's a name some of you might recognize from which it's just to be clear. So there's like a logo brand that people pay to use, but like if you see a Gold Club here and a Gold Club there, they are not affiliated. So yeah, just to be clear, it's kind of like a well-known brand. But but this particular one was like a big, very big, like VIP kind of gentleman's club. It was right in the financial district downtown San Francisco. Completely different scene than I was used to at Mary's in Portland.
What was the difference?
Well, this one, it was huge for one thing. Mary's is really small. And like I said, it was more stage oriented. I think I had just done maybe a handful of table dances before I ever went there. This is definitely more like the stage is just a showcase. You're on stage for a couple times a night, and the rest of the time you're like hustling for dances pretty much, you know. So you're doing table dances on the floor. There was like a VIP area, kind of balcony, or there was the champagne rooms. And so this was the first time that I was actually dancing to make money, and had kind of opened myself up to the idea of actually hustling it all and trying to hustle for dances and stuff like that. And my friend worked at a club that was more like that here in Portland. So she kind of schooled me a little bit, and you know, I learned along the way. But so that was a very different approach.
How was it though? Like, did you catch on quick, or
to some degree? I think there was a lot, like, especially between then and now where I'm at, I think I still had a lot of resistance, and I could have done a lot better if I would have just like chilled out about certain things. But for the most part, like, I got it. I did pretty well. And it's interesting because it opened me up to a whole other layer, like worlds of layers of aspects of this work and the industry and clientele and everything that I hadn't experienced before, when I was just like, no, I'm just here to perform. And also because of the clientele, I think, because we had a lot of like really high-end businessmen, you know, from around the world. A lot of them were from like, you know, executives from like huge companies all over the place. And so there's, you know, they're throwing around a lot of money, but I also had really amazing conversations with people, and I learned a lot about business, a lot about different things. I started to realize, oh wow, this is like a gold mine of information, just having these conversations. So I like definitely made a point to like pick their brains a little bit, but also just some really good relationships with regulars. Cause like I had maybe a couple regulars at Mary's, but that's a very different thing when it's just like a regular audience member. This kind of situation where you're, you know, people are more like paying for your time, and you're doing dances, but like if you're in a champagne room or something, you're doing a lot of just like talking and communing and just, you know, having a good time, partying together. And it's different with every client depending on what they're there for. So yeah, it was very different, really educational experience.
So would you say the money was much better in San Francisco?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, I hadn't worked at that kind of a club in Portland, and to be honest, there wasn't one that was quite on the scale there. I think probably the money was just, there was just a lot higher ceiling down there anyway because of the area. But yeah, a lot of it was the kind of club too, because you know, having the dances in the champagne rooms and where you can, I mean, if you're able to charge for every single hour, every single minute you're working, that can really add up. And then sometimes people are very generous with tips as well. So like, yeah, it's a little bit different than just like whatever tips you're going to make on stage and a couple $20 dances. You know.
So you said you had your daughter at this point too, and
my eldest,
So were you and her father, you guys in a relationship at this point, or no? No. So how I asked that to ask, how has the industry affected your love life, relationships? Like, is it easy to have a relationship while you're dancing, or does it affect you, or does it affect your person in a relationship? How is that?
Yeah, well, so that's another kind of loaded question too. So yeah, I mean, the simple answer, I guess, is like, yes, it definitely has an effect. It's not always bad necessarily. I mean, for me, I'm just sort of like, this is me, and if it doesn't work for you, we're not a good match anyway. But but sometimes like it's not always apparent, or people think they can handle it, and then it just turns out to be too much. So I definitely had a couple of those situations like early on where I was with somebody that you know, thought it was okay, but then they started freaking out a little bit and just didn't work out. I actually met the father of my 2 younger kids in the club working in San Francisco. And so that was a whole other situation too, where I was like, I did the thing I said I would never do, like, you know, date a customer or whatever. And it was a little bit of a one-off situation. So but it's like, so that unfortunately like kind of ended in disaster, like years later, divorce and all that stuff. But it's hard to say like how much that came into play, but it set the stage for a lot of it as well, because there's like a third party involved, which was part of the demise of the relationship, who was somebody who was also working at that club. Oh. So it's kind of like, soap opera drama, but at the same time, it's like, it's funny because I thought I really had a very, very different situation, but I hear this kind of story from a lot of dancers.
Do you care to kind of speak on that a little bit?
No, it's fine.
Were you did you have a situation with somebody in the club, or?
Yeah, well, so an
entanglement, or
kind of an entanglement. So I met him there, and we talked and did a couple dances and gave him my number. We ended up dating later, and he had already started seeing somebody at that club, or I mean before that, but didn't tell me about it. And it was kind of like. It was like kind of a one-off, and then he went back to his relationship, and that was kind of on a pause when we met. So there was like a whole series of things. It's kind of stuff that, you look back years later and you're like, oh my God, red flag, red, Right. But at the same time, it's interesting how much like, that stuff happens like a lot in different contexts outside of the industry. Mm-hmm. But I wonder sometimes if it's more common in this kind of a situation because you're in a place where it feels like the normal rules don't apply. And so I see that with certain customers where they're like, oh, then anything goes. And it's like, no, there's still rules, there's still boundaries, And so even if people are clear, think they're clear about certain aspects of it, there's also like a certain kind of, I don't even know what to call it. Like, it's not really a subculture, but just some underlying thing that maybe is a common aspect of people's personality that attracts certain people to this scene as a customer or whatever. I mean, it's weird because there's different things. It's like what attracts a customer to a strip club, for example, is very different 99% of the time, I would say, from my experience, than what attracts the dancers to that work. Right. Very different. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Okay, yeah. But as far as like what attracts the customer, I think it kind of depends, but there's like a common thing maybe where it's like, okay, I can, there's certain permission here to explore things that are outside of boundaries, but there's like a not clear understanding of respect and how, I hope that made sense. You're asking me some really good questions.
Thank you. So I'm wondering, so we already kind of talked about like some of the pros of dancing, like the flexible schedule. Yeah. What about like at this point so not now, but even at this point when you were in San Francisco for these years, at that point, like what were the cons? What was the negatives of dancing? Like, did you feel any negatives at that point?
Yeah, well, it could be pretty grueling. I mean, it's not easy walking around. Physically grueling. Yeah, walking around in high heels and tiny outfits. A lot of times it's really cold in the club.
Feet rubbed?
Yeah.
You were getting massages and things like that?
I should have been, but
how do you manage the?
I have like kind of I have a self-care routine that like, I'm better and worse at different times about maintaining it, but definitely getting massages is good. And I have kind of a routine I developed for myself for like certain needs of the chronic condition that has to do with like muscular retention and stuff like that. And I went to massage school at one point to, so I use like certain massage tools and do certain stretches, but a lot of dancers like do yoga, get regular massages. Chiropractic is really good. So just kind of typical for any dancer. But then there's also certain things like we do a lot of floor work. So at first it's like, man, for baby dancers or just coming back to it, it's like your knees and your legs are like all beat up with bruises from like the stage, the pole. Yeah, I remember when I was first learning pole tricks, I'd had people that be like, is everything okay at home? Because I have like bruises. I'm like, yeah, it's all below the waist, but it's just the pole beating me up. Anyway, yeah, it can be physically taxing, but also just emotionally because there are a lot of assholes that it takes effort.
When you say assholes, are you talking about customers? You talking about managers? You talking about other dancers?
Both. Okay, maybe all three. Mm-hmm. I feel like
These white chocolates are crazy.
Oh man, don't even get me started. Too late. He already broke one open.
My bad, but yeah.
All right, we'll exchange. So, see, now I'm already distracted. What were we talking about? We were talking about chocolate.
The assholes. The
yes.
grown part, the customers.
Okay,
the
so
other dancers.
As far as other dancers, I've gotten pretty lucky. I mean, I've experienced some cattiness, but I've managed to just keep myself out because I'm pretty much just don't like drama, and I try to stay out of it and make friends, and that's worked pretty well for me. Management at different places, it can be really shitty, and a lot of it is usually just what it's like the corporate places. A lot of times it's coming from the top down, and so there's just not as much personal freedom. There's more demands on like how you look, how you dress, you know, how much money they're going to take, like, you know, all kinds of stuff. So it really depends. A lot of that has gotten better over the years, and also for me, it's just like I don't last very long in a club where I don't feel respected as a dancer, but I know it's a problem in a huge portion of the industry.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of clubs, it's really a problem, which is why like here in Portland, dancers are starting to try to form a union and stuff like that. So it's also kind of another topic. But customers can also be like very demeaning sometimes, and you know, or just not treat you well, or sometimes like you know, treat you like, oh, you know, you're just here for the money, so I'm going to give you the money. You do whatever I say, right? That's how this works. And some people respond to that, and, you know, and some people don't. But, you know, sometimes people feel like they are buying the right to disrespect you, and that's what makes them feel powerful. And that can just be a lot, especially if you just have a night where you're not making money, people are jerks all night. It can be really draining.
So, okay. So if we're here, if we're right here, right? That's amazing, right? So if we're here, chocolates and champagne, it's beautiful, right? Yeah. So if we're right here, and I'm like, okay, I want you to spend this hour and a half with me, and you tell me, okay, it's gonna be, how much is hour and a half room? That's like $500, that's $1,000. How much is?
Very much depends on the club, but
right?
It probably would be at least $1,000 for an hour and a half.
Hour and a half, but at least $1,000, right?
For the room,
so if I'm, you know, champagne and all that. So if I give you $1,000, I'm like, I want you to spend this time with me. Shouldn't you spend this time with me the way I want you to spend this time with me? It's, I'm giving us $1,000. You know what I'm saying? Like that's not a little bit of money. Shouldn't you spend this time the way I want you to spend it with me?
Yeah. Well, so I think that's a really good question, and I think it's like one of the ones that's got a huge debate with fine lines around it, because the way that I will answer this question forever and always is that it has to do with respect and like personal boundaries. So you kind of enter a verbal contract together. So for example, if like this is a common question, oh, you want to go to the VIP? Well, what's going to happen in there? What happens in the back? What are you going to do?
Yeah, right.
And so most of the times, if you're just like, oh, there's no sex, like there's no sale.
Right.
So a lot of girls will try to do what they can to make it sound like whatever, you know, but like, I can't really promise anything. And that's true. You can't promise anything. Mm-hmm. So it really also kind of depends on the customer and what they're looking for, and like, you know, how gullible they are. This gets to the point where it's like, okay, who's exploiting who? But if you want to just skip all the BS and you're not just trying to get whatever and exploit the other person, there's a way to do that contract where you're very clear about what's expected or what's going to happen or whatever, you know. And I would just compare it to any other kind of contract, right? So like, say you have a contractor for your house, like you're going to have somebody come and build something, right? So you want them to use your design or whatever, but there's certain like limits, right? Like you can't be like, I want you, this may not apply, it's kind of far-fetched, but like, I want you to do your work in a G-string, right? Because aside from whatever, I mean, that wouldn't make sense safety-wise, right? So like sometimes there's like safety issues or whatever, but also I think just it has to do with like a clear communication about the contract, which is the part that is fuzzy, and that's the part where the industry I think largely has grown around people exploiting people. And to me, that's problematic. So, you know, there's a way to do it that's not necessarily part of the problem. But that's the ongoing debate, I guess. What's that money going to get me? And doesn't that mean I can tell you what to do? Like, so I don't know if I answered your question, but
definitely.
it's an ongoing conversation.
So those are some of the cons to the business. Do you have, and you've been danced a while back down there and in Portland. Do you have any like horror stories? Sorry about that.
No, that's okay.
Anything like, you got any stories either from managers, from inside the club, or?
I've been pretty fortunate. I'm sure I've got something. I was thinking of this like kind of leading up to today, trying to like come up with my worst horror story, and I think I've been pretty darn fortunate. Right. I don't have too many. I have some good stories, but nothing like too crazy outlandish, other than just so like Mary's Club is downtown. And so sometimes we see some interesting things, and I hope this doesn't scare anybody away, because it's also really awesome. This stuff doesn't happen a lot, but it's more just like it's more like where the old Mary's was, and like coming to and from work sometimes.
The old Mary's, that's right over by the Independent, right?
I'm not sure. It's on Broadway.
Like, okay. Yeah, that's on the back side.
And now it's on Burnside. So, sometimes we'd have people come in just like get really drunk and try to get really violent, or we had somebody come in and like shoot up in the bathroom and pass out. I mean, that's kind of just stuff that like, unfortunately,
sounds like Portland, though.
Yeah, it sounds like nightlife. I mean, it's not just strip club stuff. So, I haven't. I've been really fortunate that I haven't had any scary situations at work. I've had, I have a personal horror story, but that just had to do with my ex trying to serve me child custody papers while I was on stage dancing.
Wow.
Which, there's that.
I hate to open this up.
What do you need horror story?
I thought you said that nothing happened. That's crazy.
Well, I mean, that was very
active,
personal.
You were dancing.
Yeah, it was when I was in San Francisco.
And
that was part of the reason I went back to work, to make some dang money, because I needed to pay an attorney quick for this like messed up situation that was going on. So at the time he was self-represented and didn't really understand the rules, I guess. So I was just tra-la-la naked on stage, and all of a sudden he's there like trying to hand me papers, and I'm trying to shoo him out, and the bouncer has to take him outside, and then apparently there was a whole hubbub outside, and then he finally went away and then sneaked back and put the papers like in my car or something crazy like that. But anyway.
You can't serve people like that, right?
No.
You have somebody else has to do it.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. That's crazy though. Like,
I mean, I've definitely had a couple of like psycho stalkers that like brought it to work, but it wasn't really about my work. It was just, that was one place where I was working. So it showed up there.
People just showed up looking for you there.
Yeah, I've had a couple of instances where I had, one relationship that like turned very crazy, and so I cut it off, and then, discovered him in the tree outside my second story window and stuff like that. So that person tried to come in with like a wig and glasses.
You got. So wait a second. Hold on. So
I know.
Wait a second. So you got guys climbing trees, sticking outside your window, sneaking in, not just one. Huh?
Just one that time.
Just one. Sneaking into your place of employment with wigs and glasses and shit. Yeah. And you got stalkers. So what are you doing to these guys?
That's what I was wondering. Y'all know I'm not dating. Forget that.
Oh, man.
No.
Yeah, I'll stay away from this one.
Yeah, right. No. No, it is pretty funny. I mean, that's some of the stuff that like down the road you start going, okay, I'm the common factor in the equation. So like, what am I doing to attract this amount of crazy? So I definitely think it's interesting, because I can't say that this work doesn't necessarily influence that, because even if it's not like the work itself, like at work or me at the club or interacting with customers, like knowing that I'm a dancer and there's this side of me, because I think from what I've heard from a lot of men of different walks of life, like that's a pretty common fantasy, right? It's like your woman or whatever, like knows how to just be super sexy and turn you on, and how hot is that to have somebody who like knows how to erotic dance and like, all that stuff. And so, so that's definitely like been a part of like the sexy side of my relationships, because it's just part of who I am. And it's not just like what I do at work. The reason I wanted to do that work is because that's part of who I am and part of how I express myself and everything. So I do wonder sometimes if that like adds a little element of, just like obsessive quality for people who are like prone to it, and so.
Okay, so besides Portland, San Francisco, have you danced in any other cities?
Well, I spent a summer of 1997, I think it was, in Guam. In Guam. So that was a interesting situation where, so a lot of you may not know, Guam is actually part of the United States. It's a little tiny island in the Pacific Islands, kind of like in between like Japan and Australia, and part of Micronesia. And we have a huge military base there, and it's like a territory. So they have a lot of strip clubs, but they don't have a lot of dancers because it's such a tiny island. Right. So they sort of like try to import dancers. And so
I've seen some wanted in like the exotic magazines.
Yeah. So there's a lot of places like different, not just Guam, there's other places too that like will import dancers and stuff like that for a contract or whatever. So I did that for a summer with my same friend that I started dancing with in Boise, Idaho. She actually moved to Portland with me later, and we both worked at Mary's.
I like her.
Yeah, she's great. She's great.
Like
That's my homegirl.
She sounds like a rider.
She is. She is my ride or die. Yeah, we went through so much together. Like we learned a lot. That's part of, I think, why a lot of it worked for me, because I had my homegirl. Like we went through it together. But
how was Guam?
Was a
big
trip.
Money out there? Or?
Yes and no. Like for me at the time, so that was very much like, if you're a blonde Barbie doll, you make all the money. You don't have to try. So like, and I also had like really short hair, and I was going through I was still sort of in my like, don't interrupt my stage show and tell me what to do. Like, so I had a lot of resistance and stuff, but it was also very much like there was the stage, then there was private rooms, there was dances, and then they had people who worked there. They called them the drinky girls. So they were there to sell cocktails. So they didn't dance, but they were there to like sit with the guys and have a drink, like get the guys to buy them a drink. And then basically they were there to like prostitute in the back. But that's not what they were there for, but that's what they were there for. So like, so for me, like there's probably a lot of ways I could have made more money. Not even just doing that. But I was a little bit more resistant, but it was still a really, really good experience. But yeah, it was a trip. It was a whole different world. It was like very much mostly like military guys, and then like Japanese businessmen. And there was sort of a regular circuit through that, and just very different kind of scene. Okay. But that was a summer adventure for sure.
So Boise, Portland, San Francisco, and Guam.
Yeah, and I danced like 2 shifts on Oahu on my way back from Guam for the week that I stayed there.
On a layover. So in layover, you wouldn't got. That's what I'm talking about. Okay.
Yeah, I stayed for a week. I stayed at a hostel. I did the whole like, during the day I'm a hippie on the beach, and at night I was like, I'm a hot stripper in the club.
So which of those experiences was your favorite?
Oh man, that's a really good question. I mean, different things for different aspects, I guess, but I guess there's 2 equally. Like, I really appreciate the Gold Club and my time there because of everything I learned and all the ways I kind of got cracked open, which even now I've grown from, like, coming back to dancing. So that I really appreciate. But like Mary's is kind of really my all-time favorite because of the anomaly that it is. And it's grown with the times a little bit. Like the new place has 2 stages and there's private dance rooms and stuff. So there's still really good capacity to earn a lot of money. But
I've never been to Mary's when both stages were going. I've only ever been there early.
Oh yeah, it's just weekend nights. Yeah, there's 2 stages. Okay. Yeah. So I like it because it's a little bit old school, and we have total freedom. Like we can play whatever we want. We can wear whatever we want within reason. But like, and it's woman owned. It's just a very different feel. So I love that it's kind of like a little bit of a mom and pop, like hole in the wall, but it's very Portland artsy. It's got all the history. But also there's really great stage shows, and like the other women that work there, are really intelligent. Most of them are doing like really amazing things with their lives. A lot of them are in the arts and in performance, and this is part of it. And others are just like, we have like several going to school for masters and PhDs and, just doing really awesome stuff. So, I mean, that's going on everywhere too, not just at Mary's, but there's really good camaraderie. And because it's smaller, it's like more of a family vibe. So even after coming back after like 20 years, it was still just like the family was there like, hey, welcome back.
Welcome back. That's crazy. That's
kind of a trip.
So, I mean, we brushed up on it a little bit, but like, do you have any more kind of like specific differences from when you were Okay, so we didn't really touch on it, but so the people that don't know, when you were dancing, then you stepped away from it for about a decade.
Well, let's see. So it's been on and off, but from this last time, it's been probably more like closer to 15 years, probably.
Really? Okay, and so you just recently just started again about a year or so ago.
Yeah, it's been almost a year.
Okay, and so in that time, from then to now, what do you see as some of the major differences?
Yeah, so it's at least, so I can't speak to a lot of places since, like I said, I've only been at Mary's and a couple of the other clubs in Portland so far. But one of the big things I think is just like a lot of it's just stylistic things, which is going to change with every decade or every generation anyway. But we used to start like a lot more clothed. It was like changing outfits every single set, and you kind of do a different theme or a different whole thing, and it was kind of more about the like striptease aspect of it. So like you take off, the first song, sometimes we'd even do 4 songs, and it's like or you do 3, and like the first song nothing comes off, and then the top and the bottom. Now it feels like it's a lot quicker. It's like 2 songs. Some of that just depends on the club too, though. But and also it's more like there's a lot less clothing and a lot more just sort of like I don't know, showing more skin, walking around. Like at the Gold Club, when I worked there, it's like we weren't allowed to walk around with just the thong and without like a wrap or something around it. And now it's like you can walk around with just like barely anything covering, and it seems like that's more of what's desired and everything. So so it's kind of a stylistic thing, I think, a little bit. But so there's some of that stuff. Some of it I'm still learning a little bit, because also it just depends, or it varies so much from place to place, especially with like the places I'm at, between like Mary's kind of the anomaly that it is, and then like the bigger club scene, like Club Rouge Beaverton is the other place I've been working recently. And I also worked at Stars Cabaret, and both of those are a little more like the bigger gentleman's club, kind of like fancier, have VIP and champagne rooms. It's like more of a smaller version of Gold Club in San Francisco that I used to work at. Yeah.
Okay, so let me ask you this. This is we're kind of getting to wrapping it up. We're definitely, so part 2, part 3, we'll get a little deeper into some things. Just kind of wanted to have an introduction today, introduce you to the people, introduce the people to you. But what I want to know is this, Willow. So let's say tomorrow.
Big question.
Let's say tomorrow, right? Let's say you're, I don't know, you're hanging out, you're in Portland downtown or something, right? And you walk into a coffee shop, and this little girl comes out of a time machine, from 1996. 18-year-old Willow steps out of a time machine in 1996, or better yet, you get in a time machine and go back to 1996, and you run across 18-year-old Willow, and she's like, I'm getting into the game right now. This is what I'm doing. Do you have any advice for me? What advice do you give? What advice do you give the 18-year-old version of you?
I was afraid you were going to ask me this. In fact, I thought about it today and kept avoiding thinking about it more. Because I feel like
it's time to think about it.
Pressure's on.
You're on the spot.
So, that's pretty loaded. But I guess I'm not even totally sure how to like boil it down. But I think it kind of comes down to what I found myself talking a lot about tonight, which is just like, for myself, one of the things that has changed is that I went into this thinking like, oh, I'm so open-minded. I'm doing this differently. I'm being so healthy. I've got these strict boundaries and I'm taking good care of myself. And I think that was all true to a certain degree. But I think that some of the ways that I thought I was protecting myself actually just limited me. And so I would say I'm not even exactly sure how I would put that into like advice, but something like, don't be so afraid to expand the boundaries and explore a little bit, like within reason or whatever. I think there was things that I was really afraid of being the thing that I was fighting or something like that. And not that I was necessarily fighting, but part of what got me into this, like I said, was like these very traumatic things that had happened. I wanted to understand, like, how do we get here? And the sex industry itself is something that had always been touted as this like taboo thing, and it's just unhealthy. So if you're going to go explore this, like put on your hazmat suit, you know.
Right.
But if you got your hazmat suit on, you don't get the whole experience of all the like the textures and the smells and like, you know what I mean. So this is very metaphorical right now.
So are you saying you would tell 18-year-old Willow to take off her hazmat suit?
To a degree, maybe like I don't know, like I would say something like maybe at least don't be afraid to do this for money. Like I think I was so paranoid about the money corrupting me that I was just like, it can't have anything to do with money, but like, duh, it's a job. Right. I mean, I need a job and I'm doing like, you know, I'm not just doing this for fun, and any other job I'm going to do for money. And if I'm like, at a restaurant, I'm going to try to like pitch sales for like the most expensive food or whatever and get a bigger tip. So like,
so looking back on that, were you afraid that if you allowed yourself to do it for money, that it would be considered like a form of prostitution? Like you would look at yourself like as a whore or something? Like
yeah, I think I still had some fear about that. And I think I wasn't quite sure where the line was, but I was so terrified of stepping over it that I just held myself back in a lot of ways. You know, yeah, I think I was just really afraid of kind of becoming corrupted because I do have like a pretty addictive personality, as they say, or whatever. I'm sure there's like a more modern correct term for that. But you know, like I can get addicted to things very easily. So like I do have to watch substance intake and stuff like that because it's easy for me. So I think I kind of went into that knowing, but a lot of this stuff I wasn't as clearly aware of because I was still so young. And so I was exploring a lot of these things, but didn't really necessarily have all the clarity or all the language for it to sort it out. So, but I think that there was some really important things that would have served me well to learn when I was younger about boundaries and, my own self-esteem and everything that ironically could have helped me more then if I would have been willing to venture a little bit farther. And as far as just like, I'm in stripper land. I'm going to do what the strippers do. I was like, I'm in stripper land and I'm going to do it different. Like, but you know, sometimes it's good to like get to know the territory before you do it different, because otherwise you're missing things. They're important things of like how and why it is the way it is, which is a big part of the reason I got into it in the first place. So
And so that's the advice you would give 18-year-old Willow.
I think so.
Okay. So
one of them.
It's part two of that question. Is that the same advice you would give one of your daughters? If
I knew that was coming. As a matter of fact, yes. There's a lot of other advice that would come first, but it's funny you ask that because I happen to have a 22-year-old daughter who's very interested in doing this work. And so we've been having a lot of conversations about this.
Has she tried before?
No, she hasn't. And she's content with what she's doing right now. And she's exploring different like avenues for her own curiosity about, you know, dance and eroticism and stuff like that. But yeah, and I don't know, she feels like she has some self-esteem stuff to work out or whatever before she would feel comfortable, which I think is really good and healthy, you know. But I appreciate being able to have that open dialogue with her, because I feel like if she does explore it, she's gonna listen to my advice. And you know,
is she like you at that age? Does she remind you of yourself? Or
she does in a lot of ways, and in a lot of ways not too. Right. So like a lot of my advice for her would be that like very specific to her, like ways that like coming from my experience, learning what I've learned and knowing myself for who I am, and then knowing the ways that she's the same and different. There's like certain advice I would give her, you know, to help her through that maybe like I already had mastered, or other things that like were hard for me that will be easy for her, like, you know, so.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's
was that as vague as could be?
No. It's been great, just, you know, chatting with you, just, you know, learning a lot about your story, and, you know, just thinking about. I can't wait for part 2. I can't wait for part 3. I'm already thinking of questions to ask you next time we sit down.
Me too. Yeah, my mind is exploding.
Before we do wrap it up, though, I do actually. So here in the champagne room. It comes with champagne and chocolate. But we also like to give a little care package.
Oh,
yeah, we like to give a care package. I don't know exactly what. Let me just double check in here. I know that's supposed to be 2 things. 2 things for function, for like dancing and
practical,
whatnot. Yeah, two
practical magic and magic.
Yeah, it's supposed to be 2 functional gifts and then 2 enjoyment gifts.
Oh,
okay. So
I'm so intrigued.
or fun gifts. Two practical and 2 fun.
This
gifts.
could mean so many things. I
Right,
really
so,
should I open it now?
Oh, if you want to.
Should I share it with our viewers?
Oh yeah, that's up to you. I mean, it's yours.
Ooh, very sexy. I love this. Actually, that's crazy. I was just wanting one of these.
Oh,
I have a friend who does crazy pull stuff in this like net thing, and I'm super excited.
Yeah, we like to.
Oh, nice. And I know I mentioned magic a lot, but I don't know if I mentioned that I do tarot, so that's
tarot.
pretty awesome. I've never even heard of this. How did I never hear this deck before? Yep, like he said, pleasurable and fun.
Oh, that's all. There's one more thing.
That's just for me.
There's one more functional gift in there.
Did I miss it? I got so excited about that one. Oh, is this the dry hands? Yes. Thank you. Oh, this is another thing that has changed. Just a real quick note. There are so many great things for strippers now that didn't exist, like pole classes, for example, and dry hands, and so many nifty things.
They didn't have that?
No, I mean, maybe they did, but I didn't know about it. And we didn't just like hop on the internet to search way back
so
then.
I have vending machines in some of the clubs around town.
Yeah, I noticed that at Rouge. Yeah.
Oh yeah, so I bought that one's not mine.
Oh, okay,
the one at Rouge isn't mine. But I buy a lot of pole grip for the vending machines.
Yeah, I gotta get used to it. I tried using it, and then I was like, okay, this is great. But then I was like, now what do I do this? Yeah. I gotta get used to that. So.
Right. Well, like I said, man, I can't wait for the next one. I appreciate this one. Appreciate you taking the time out, sitting down, having a glass of champagne.
Thank you so much. This has been really awesome. Yeah, it's a real gift for me too, not just because of the gifts. Thanks, everybody.
Well, Oxbox fam, welcome to the Champagne Room again. Thank you for coming by, and we will see you soon. Goodbye. Make sure y'all like the video too, comment and subscribe and all that.